Hey, welcome. Welcome. And before I get started, I want to say thank you, everyone, for watching this episode of Suave and Sassy Seniors. I'm Sonya Dunbar, and I'm so excited. I'm really excited and honored to be bringing you this show. Just in case this is your first time, go back, subscribe to my YouTube channel, and watch the other shows. But also, I'm so excited to be bringing you what I call our greatest generation. This show was developed to highlight seniors or seasoned adults living their best life. I have amazing guests on my show, and they talk about their life journey. They talk about what they're doing now, retirement, and different aspects of seasoning adults. So today, I have a guest that I was drawn to because he was such a bright light on LinkedIn. His energy and posts drew me to him. I want to welcome Stefan to my show.
Hello, Sonya.
Hello, sir. Thank you for being on my show.
Thank you for having me on. It is a blessing and an honor. You've made my day.
Thank you. So now listen, like I said in the intro, your light on social media is amazing. You share, your posts are uplifting, but now I know why. You sent me your book. I just got it and I've just been able to crack it open. But your journey, your why, your reason is phenomenal. It started from what I see in the book with your mother and a heart attack. But can you just begin to tell my guest why you're so positive and you have so much energy and your light shines so bright? Can you give us a glimpse into your journey?
Sonya, I grew up in a very turbulent household. I was born and raised in Waterbury, Connecticut. I'm the youngest of 6 children, and my father was an abusive man. He was physically abusive. He was sexually abusive to my mother. He was mentally abusive. He was emotionally abusive. And my mother was an alcoholic, and there was a lot of drama in the household growing up. And we're all blessed with different gifts. All of us have different gifts, and I'm blessed with many gifts. And one of the gifts that I've been blessed with is the ability to view things in perspective and make an informed decision. I haven't always used that gift. I haven't always followed my own advice, but it is a gift that I know came from the divine. And so I would see all this drama, I would see all this turbulence, I would see all this arguing and fighting and drinking and drugs and so on and so forth going on. And I would ask myself, even as a young kid, is that all there is to life? Is that all there is? Is this really what I'm here for? I never wanted to be part of the drama. I never wanted to be part of all of the negative things that were happening in my household growing up. And so I was drawn to scripture. I was drawn to God's will for my life, even as a young kid. And I was drawn to the writings of people like Dr. Norman Vincent Peale and Anthony Robbins and Marianne Williamson, who were urging me to search for a better life, to become the best version of myself. And so that is where I come from. And that's where the positivity comes from, because the only way to negate negativity, the only way to combat negativity is with love and positivity. And that's why I bring it forth every day. You know, we're living in a very turbulent world. We're living in very troubling times. And it's easy to give in to all of the negative things that we're seeing on the news. It's easy to give in to despair. And so my social media posts, whether they're on Facebook or LinkedIn or Instagram or Tumblr or Twitter, are my little effort to put positivity into the world. And I am just so lucky and fortunate and blessed because I get incredible feedback from people literally around the world telling me that my posts are giving them hope, my posts are giving them meaning, my posts are encouraging them to become the best version of themselves.
And so let me piggyback right here. You in your book, it speaks about your family being with having some Nazi involvement. From you come from a Jewish background, and you said you had a alcoholic father, mother,
Alcoholic mother, abusive father, yes.
father. And did you get stuck? And if you did get stuck, how did you become unstuck? Because so many people have a history. They have a hard life coming up, and they continue to relive that. So how did how did you overcome that? Because
My
people
father
are
was
our age and they're still struggling with that right now. There are
My
people that
father
are,
was born and raised in Warsaw, Poland. He fought in the Polish army during World War II, and the Polish army was just overrun by the Nazi forces. At that time, Germany had the most advanced army in the world, and so the Polish army was just decimated. My father was wounded in battle, and he was in a prisoner of war camp for 5.5 years.
your father?
My father, yes.
Wow.
My mother was born and raised in southeastern Poland, farm country. Her family was farmers. And at the age of 16, this would have been 1941, my mother was 16 years old. She was walking to school one day when she was kidnapped by the Nazi forces and shipped up to Germany with other young able-bodied Polish kids. And for 4 years, age 16 through 20, my mother was a slave laborer in Nazi Germany. So, when I talk about my father being an abusive man, and I talk about my mother being an alcoholic, and I talk about growing up in such a turbulent environment, and my parents having a terrible, terrible marriage, it's not that I'm just talking about that, Sonya. We tend to blame other people for our own misfortunes, and so this is not a book about me blaming my parents for growing up in an abusive household. This is explaining where I came from, and also explaining not only where I came from, but explaining why my father was an abusive man. He was as I said, in a prisoner of war camp for 5.5 years, where the Nazi soldiers would come in on a regular basis and point a gun at him and pull the trigger. And they did the same thing to other prisoners, and sometimes there was a bullet in the gun and sometimes there wasn't. But I think of my father being in that prisoner of war camp for 5.5 years. No wonder why he was mentally ill. He lived through horrific, horrific conditions, seeing man's inhumanity to other men. So in the book, I'm not just saying, hey, my father was abusive. I say my father was abusive, and here's why I think he was abusive. And so I'm not just saying my mother was an alcoholic, but I'm also explaining her background. She was a slave laborer for 4 years. She got pregnant by my father. They were in a very abusive relationship. So maybe this is why my mother drank. Maybe this is the way that she handled the stress and the abuse in her life. And then as I was writing the book, Sonya, I thought to myself, well, if I'm going to talk about the imperfections of my father and my mother, then I also have to talk about my own imperfections. And in the book, I talk about becoming a disc jockey in my hometown of Waterbury, Connecticut in the 1970s. And it was sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And so, as I said, I'm not just talking about the imperfections of my father, the imperfections of my mother, but I also talk about my own imperfections being involved with drugs back in the mid to late 70s, and how taking those drugs almost took my life. And then when you fast forward to the year 2016, 5 years ago, when I was diagnosed with a very, very serious genetic heart defect, and then you think about all of the drugs and all of the drinking and all the crazy things that I did as a hot rock and flame throwing disc jockey back in the mid to late 70s, you could reasonably conclude that all of that crazy and wild behavior and irresponsible behavior should have killed me. But for whatever reason, I didn't die from the drugs and the alcohol. God kept me alive because he had a purpose for my life. And so 5.5 years ago, I had a fainting spell here at the house, and I had never fainted before in my life. And long story short, I had additional fainting spells, and I went to the hospital. I went to see a cardiologist. I had a lot of different testing done, every heart test known to man, and it was revealed to me that I had a rare genetic heart disease, and I needed major open heart surgery. And so when you look at the prism of my life, growing up in the abusive household and then getting involved with the drugs and the alcohol myself back in the mid to late 70s, shoulda, coulda, woulda, I had every reason in the world to continue with behavior that wasn't healthy for me, but God put me on a different path. And part of the path is telling my story to other people who may have grown up in an abusive household, or maybe they're in an abusive marriage, or maybe they're involved with sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Maybe they look at me and maybe they get a hint that there is a better way, because there is a better way. Clean living, healthy thinking, positive thinking, putting forth as much positive energy as possible into the world. But it all begins in here, in our minds and in our hearts.
Wow. 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 Man, that was amazing. So before we go on, you have to let me know and a couple of my other viewers, what's a disc jockey?
Disc jockey is a guy or a gal who talks on the radio. You know, back in
so a radio host.
Yeah, a radio disc jockey. I was playing records on the radio and talking.
DJ.
Oh yeah, DJ.
Okay. I needed to know what it. I said disc jockey. And the whole time you're talking, I'm like, okay, I got to ask about that. Okay, cool. But you have, man, drugs, sex, everything, and look at you now. Because of your mindset, you were able to overcome.
Yes.
And I like the fact that and thank you for being vulnerable. This book is about being vulnerable, because you shared a lot in this book, and thank you for sharing, because there's someone who needs to hear this. And no matter what age we are, it's okay to share your story. It's okay to share your journey, because it may help someone else along the way. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, Sonya. And when I wrote the book, and thank you very much for having my book on display, it took me 5 years to write the book. I mentioned that I had the major open heart surgery, and the surgery that I had was one of the most serious operations that a human being can have. And they told me it was going to be a 3-month recovery period, a difficult 3 months of recovery. And it was 3 months of a very difficult recovery. I figured, I got 3 months. I'll write the book then. I'll start writing the book. I actually knew I was going to write a book. All my life growing up, I knew I was going to write a book. I just never really figured out what that book was going to be. And then when I had the open heart surgery, I figured, you know what, I've got the 3 months. I'll write the book in 3 months. And it took me 5 years to write the book. And the reason why it took me 5 years to write the book instead of just doing it in 3 months is I would sit down at the computer and I would think about all of the drama and the turbulence and the violence that went on in my house, and I couldn't write. I would just sit at the computer and I would cry, because all of these feelings and all of these emotions would come up through me, and I just couldn't write. And so the biggest decision I had to make was, do I want to reveal these things in a book? Do I want to tell the world that my father was abusive? Do I want to tell the world that my mother was an alcoholic? Do I want to confess to the world that this clean-cut guy, me, this family man, do I want to tell the world that I was into sex, drugs, and rock and roll back in the mid to late 70s? And I thought to myself, if I only write one book, and I'm not saying I'm never going to write another book, but if I only write one, then the book that I've written is that book. And so long after I'm gone, this book is going to be here. And more than anything, Sonya, I wanted the book to stand for the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And so that's why I laid everything out in the book the way that I did. And when I was writing the book, I had 3 goals. My first goal was to write a story that I could be proud of. And I'm very proud of this book because I laid everything out. I didn't hold anything back. I just put it out there. I put myself in a position of vulnerability, and I told the story in this memoir, and I'm very proud of the book that I've written. So that was goal number 1, to write a book that I could be proud of. Number 2 was to work with a publisher that respected the story. And I'm blessed with a publisher that really believed in this story. When I sent my publisher the manuscript, and then we had the follow-up Zoom call, I could tell that he had read every word and every line and every sentence and every paragraph and every page. And I could tell in that follow-up conversation that my book had moved him. And so, again, goal number 1 was to write a story I could be proud of. Goal number 2 was to work with a publisher that respected the story. And my third goal was the most important goal of all. My third goal with my book was to make a positive impact on one person in the world, just one person. And I figured that was an achievable goal because there's 7.7 billion people on this planet. So I figured one person out of 7.7 billion was doable. And about 2 weeks after my book came out, I got a message on Facebook Messenger from a woman from down south who said, "Stefan, I just got done reading your book. It has impacted me in ways that I just can't express in writing. I'd like to talk to you." And she gave me her phone number. And so I called her, and she was very pleased to hear from me. And in a nutshell, Sonya, it's a 73-year-old woman who lives in Virginia. And she said, "Stefan, I've been battling lung cancer. I'm going through treatment for lung cancer. And all this time, this whole time, I have felt in my mind that this lung cancer is something bad that happened to me. And when I read your book and you talked about the shocking medical diagnosis that you received, that you had a very rare genetic heart disorder, and you had to go through this major, major operation. Basically, Sonya, the operation was they put me under very heavy anesthesia. They cut my chest open. They sawed my breastbone in half, pulled me open like a lobster, took my heart out of my body on my chest, and in order to replace my major valve of my heart and also to repair a very large aortic aneurysm, they had to stop my heart. That operation can't be done while the heart is beating. And so they connected me to a machine, a heart-lung machine that kept the blood and the oxygen going through my body while they did that operation. Think about the seriousness of that operation. And so in my book, I don't say, "Oh, woe is me, I was diagnosed with the..." I didn't do that. The way that I talked about my heart disease and the diagnosis and going through that operation, the way that I talked about it was in very spiritual terms, that this is part of my particular life's journey on this earth. And so getting back to the woman from Virginia, the 73-year-old woman from Virginia, she said, "Stefan, I've been treated for lung cancer. And when I read your book, I came to realize that the lung cancer is something that's part of my life's journey. And I started looking at it in terms of a spiritual dynamic, that it's part of my life's journey, and I need to invite God in to my life to help me. I need to invite God into my life to help me go through this thing, my lung cancer." But she said, "Stefan, this is not the only way your book has impacted me." And the woman went on to say that she was born into a family where the mother was a severe alcoholic. And she said the mother would be drunk, seriously drunk, By 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, they'd get home from school every day, and the mother would be completely drunk. And the mother was verbally abusive and physically abusive. And this woman was telling me that they would instead of getting gifts on Christmas morning, they'd be beaten on Christmas morning. All sorts of horrific abuse. The woman said, Stefan, I couldn't wait to turn 18 years old because that's the day that I moved out, and I never went back. And my mother is somebody that I have hated all my life. And my mother died 10 years ago, right? This is this woman talking. Her mother died when she was 63, when this woman in Virginia was 63. This woman is now 73. The mother's been dead 10 years. And she said, I have hated my mother every single day until the day I read your book. Because in your book, you talked about your abusive father, you talked about your alcoholic mother, but you didn't just blame them. Not once in your book did you express any type of hatred towards your parents, but instead you took the time to explain why your father might have been abusive, why your mother drank. And she said, I took the time for the first time in my life, after reading your book, I took the time to try to understand why my mother drank and what made her behave in the ways that she did.
Yes.
And
yes.
I decided in that moment to forgive my mother, even though she's been dead for 10 years. She's been dead for 10 years, and I hated her until the moment I finished reading your book, and I decided to forgive my mother. And she said, in that moment of forgiveness, I burst into tears. This is what this woman was telling me. She said, Stefan, I burst into tears, and I realized that all these years I've been putting energy into hating my mother. She said, I realized after reading your book that the only person I was hurting was myself. With all these feelings of anger and hatred, she said, I'll never forget the abuse that my mother put forth to me. I'll never forget her drinking. I'll never forget all the bad things that she did to my siblings. I'll never forget. But I have forgiven her for being a human being with faults, just like we all.
Wow. So you accomplished all 3 goals that you wanted to do with this book.
Thanks be to God.
But would I be safe to say that your golden nugget is this? Understanding someone else's journey can help aid in forgiveness. Because a lot of people right now are carrying hurt feelings, hatred, and anger toward people who have hurt them. And it's not saying to make an excuse for what they did. But if you can understand their journey, maybe you could understand, and maybe you can extend the olive branch of forgiveness. Does that make sense?
It makes a tremendous amount of sense. And the other thing that I want to share, Sonya, is, and this is deeply personal, I have always felt divinely guided. I haven't always followed that divine guidance. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll, that's not what God wanted me to do, and that's where free will comes in. But I have always felt divinely guided, even as a young kid. And when I would see all of these things going on in my life, invariably I came around to asking God how he wanted me to handle it. And if the answer didn't come right away, I had to learn patience, to learn that my timing is not God's timing, and God's timing isn't necessarily my timing. And the other thing that I learned is that God always answers prayers. He always answers prayers. He either gives us what we want, all right? He either gives us what we asked for, or he gives us what we should have asked for.
That's it. That's it. He gives us what we asked for, or he gives us what we should have asked for.
Oh, give us what we should have asked for.
Wow. Well, listen, you have made my heart warm. Where can we order this amazing healing journey. If someone wants to understand the shadows on my heart. Wow, shadows on my heart. Because how many of us have shadows on our heart? That's deep. That title is just something in that. Where can we order the book at?
Thank you for asking. It's available on Amazon, barnesandnoble.com, pretty much any website where you can buy books.
Wow. Wow, man, you have made my day. Thank you, Mr. Rybak, for being a guest on the Suave and Sassy Seniors. You sure are a Suave senior with an amazing stories. Thank you for sharing the shadows on our heart story. Thank you for being here today. I'm so excited to tell people to go and purchase this book. I can't wait to dive into it. When I received it, I just had an opportunity to take a sneak peek. But thank you for being here. Thank you for being a guest on our show. And as I always say, stay safe and stay courageous.
Thank you
Bye.
so much for the honor and the blessing. God bless you.